Welcome to the Spirit of Truth podcast. Joining us today is Byron Belitsos. He's going to talk about the Eden-Atlantis project and his experience at Contact in the Desert that he was just at. So stick with us, it's going to be good. Welcome back. Joining us today is Byron Belitsos. Byron, it's so awesome to have you here, man. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Derek.
Yeah, well, we're really lucky. You know, I didn't even know you were coming through here. It was just really fortuitous. And can you maybe tell us why you're coming through here? Because I know you got a cool project coming up, and everyone is always interested in what Byron is up to. And what a cool opportunity. So just please let us know what your project is.
Thank you, Derek. It's a privilege to be with your audience and to explain what we're up to. I'm here with Fred Harris, and he and I are in a team with Captain Robert Bates to create a new expedition to the site of what we think is Atlantis and Eden and Garden of Eden.
Cool.
So that's what we call the Eden-Atlantis project, which has several books and has yet another book coming out very soon called Eden-Atlantis Project. So I'm in town to sort of present this to a group that could help us with funding. So we have a formal presentation tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Cool. Hopefully I can join. So let's get into the more interesting stuff, not just all the production stuff.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
Okay. So for people who are new, and Eden-Atlantis, Eden-Atlantis, what's the deal with that?
Well, there's all these theories about Atlantis, and it's been covered, widely on the History Channel and, all kinds of places, National Geographic Television. So it's pretty, Discovery Channel is another one. So it's, really popular, and it's a part of pop culture today is where is Atlantis? What is Atlantis? And it's not just today. It goes back a long time. It really kind of starts from Edgar Cayce's theories. In particular, but stuff earlier, but it wasn't that well known, and really until the 60s, 70s when Edgar Cayce kind of got this thing started, saying that we were going to find Atlantis in 1969, right? So he gave this prophecy in the 30s.
Oh, wow.
And they found something, it was not, he didn't say they would find all of Atlantis. He said we'll find some part of Atlantis. And so his own students went out and found this underwater, not very far underwater, artifacts that looked like a road near Bimini, in the Caribbean.
Okay.
And that was, pretty well covered all over the world. So it kind of got people started. It popularized Cayce's idea of Atlantis, but it fired up everybody's imagination. And to this day, there's the Atlantis Hotel and Resort nearby,
Oh, wow.
kind of because of that. It's a huge place,
Wow.
So it's become a, great kind of commercial thing.
But now where you guys are focused on is in a specific location, though. Right?
Yeah, so that's one theory, and there's maybe 10 other major theories. And I got started as a book publisher. I have this company that's published kind of cutting or edgy books. And so a guy named Robert Sarmas brought me a book about his theory of Atlantis some time ago, almost 20 years ago, and I was very impressed.
Yeah.
So his theory of Atlantis is better than the other theories of Atlantis because he's just more detailed than I've ever seen, because he looks at the original theory, which comes from Plato.
Right.
That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from just Plato started this. Nobody really talked about it. Edgar Cayce picked it up. It was thought about a little bit by Francis Bacon and other people, but nobody went looking for it,
Right,
and so this guy said, I'm going to go looking for it, because I have a match to what Plato said, and Plato had a lot of detail. And he counted about 50 things Plato said. I mean, physical things.
Wow.
Their physical things include like what kind of flora, fauna, what kind of minerals, how high are the mountains. It was on this plain that was so many miles wide and so many miles, long, and a lot of stuff like what the temperature was like, what the prevailing weather was like. So he lined all that stuff up, and he showed that his location was a match to 48 of the 50 clues.
Wow.
Yeah. And, it was a pretty good match, because I really, as a publisher, I had to scrutinize this, and it's like, man, this is cool. So he said it had to be in this underwater location. because he looked extensively at maps in the Eastern Mediterranean, because he interpreted what Plato said as pointing to the Eastern Mediterranean rather than to the Atlantic.
Right.
So like almost everybody says Atlantic. That's also channeling, by the way. I think maybe Madame Blavatsky, I'm not sure about that, but I think she said Atlantic, and other people said Atlantic, so channeled stuff, early channeled stuff,
Right.
19th century stuff. So people thought Atlantic forever. And there's some things in the Atlantic that are interesting. But he said, no, it had to be near the biblical events of the Bible and the events of Greece, where Greece is, where Plato was, and Egypt, because the legend really came out of Egypt not to Plato personally, but to someone who told Plato.
Oh.
So Egyptian priests, like way back, 800 BC, told this Greek statesman who was visiting them, and he was a very special guy named Solon, Solon, and he was a guy known to be. He wrote the Constitution for Athens.
Oh wow!
He's actually the lawgiver to Athens, right?
Cool.
So he was a pretty high profile guy. So he happened to go to Egypt, and they told him about this secret of Atlantis. So he brought that back, and his family passed it down to Plato's family. So Plato got the story, but probably with missing pieces, but still had a ton of stuff in it that was not a myth. It's a claim that there's something that was there, and it had a certain type of people, and there was a huge flood that wiped it out about 10,000 years previous.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'd have to show a lot of these things if
Right.
you were an archaeologist that match what Plato says, because I think we can take Plato, fairly literally, because Plato said things that were figurative and allegorical. Not often, but in each dialogue he had allegories, sort of like Jesus. Jesus had parables.
Parables, yeah.
And in Plato, he illustrates things with myths that he kind of makes up to illustrate principles. So, and it's not what he's doing here.
Okay.
He's saying, this is historic, and I was told this, and he talked about it in two places. He talked about it in the Critias, a famous dialogue, and he talked about it in the Timaeus, a really famous dialogue. So he talked about it twice. So that's pretty important, because
Yeah.
Plato's like big cheese.
Well, it
right?
reminds me of how that guy Schliemann found Troy.
I'm glad you bring that up, because that's a perfect segue analogy that he said, look, what's in the Iliad and the Odyssey, we can take some of this literally, and I'm going to prove it. And everybody said, you're crazy, you're a fool. And he disproved the critics who were academics.
Yeah.
And the academics said, no, it's just myth. It's just, made up. And then the guy goes to the place where they're talking about it.
Verbatim, yeah.
Yeah, and found it pretty quick, without much, effort. And he found it. There it was, and he dug it up.
So let's get a little bit more specific. So where would one dig if one, according to you guys, where would they look?
Well, unfortunately, you have to go underwater. So this is... So the notion is that it would have to have been in the Eastern Mediterranean, because all of the events of the Sumerians and the Greeks and the Israelis, the Hebrews and the Egyptians, that's where they're happening. That's where they are.
Right.
And they're not out in the Atlantic. They're not in the Caribbean.
Right.
They didn't have ships that could really go there. Not until the 15th century did ships go across, hardly. Maybe the Vikings did at some point.
Well, I just want to know, you're privileged with Urantia book information, and are you leading with that in this project? Because I know sometimes you dive in and out of different cultures and whatnot, so I'm just wondering how front of a role is that playing?
It's just one of many of narratives. Of course, it's I think the best narrative and the most detail. But on the other hand, there's a lot of detail in Plato too. There's a lot of detail in the Sumerian tablets as well. Yeah. Although you can't really say that's historic detail, but it's actual their stories.
Right.
And their stories are really out there in these tablets. There's like 20,000 tablets,
And again, though, that's where it's almost like letting the Urantia book kind of lead a little bit, where it says, there's these tablets of Sumerians who dealt with the Adamites and the Nodites, and Dalmatia was destroyed in a tidal wave. And I believe I remember we had Robert Sarmast on, the Cosmic Citizen, and he was giving an example to how the destruction story of Dalmatia and Eden could be interchangeable in history's interpretation.
Yeah, I dig that. I think that's correct. I didn't want to get too much into Sarmast right off the bat because he's just one theorist. He's a good theorist.
Right.
And there's others, and some of them are quite credible. So let's say, we've got Sarmast, but we need to compare him to the other major theories.
Yeah.
That's only fair because a lot of these guys have done major expeditions of their own, and they have some data. And even the Edgar Cayce thing has data. There really was a road that they found. It's like, who would have thought?
Yeah.
But back to the Sumerians, if I may.
Sure.
That since they have this narrative about this guy named Enki, and he's got this barge, and he goes around this kind of concentric circles city, kind of like Plato, and then there's characters in that story. There's all kinds of detail in that story of a pre-antediluvian, I think we call it,
right.
Pre-flood a culture that is the progenitor of the Sumerians, way ahead of the Sumerians. So, this is kind of an important document, which, not one document, but many documents, which become the source documents for the Bible. So we need to get the Bible in there now.
Right.
And the Bible is, the Genesis story comes out of, a lot of it comes out of the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, right? So that's 6th century BC, when they're when they're in the land of the Sumerians. Of course, it's like 3,000 years later.
The Babylonians by
then. It's now the Babylonians,
yeah.
right? So they have that whole legacy from the Babylonians. That's a garbled version of the Sumerian story.
Right.
So that gets passed down to the scribes and the Jewish, the Hebrew leaders, and then they later, like 3rd century BC, are writing this down in Genesis. Some people say. Other people say other things, but it's after the Babylonian captivity. That's only 6th century BC. So this is a long distance from the events, long, but not so far from Plato, right? Plato's 5th century. So it's thought that they might have read Plato, and the Hebrews, right? I've heard that theory that they might have, but it's more likely that they got it from the Sumerian stuff, from the Babylonian stuff, which had Adam and Eve and first humans, and Sumerians have Enki, who's like the Adam, right? And they have female deities as well that you know better than I do about that. So, but it comes into the Bible and it's very brief, unfortunately cryptic. Short thing about fallen angels, and the angels go into the daughters of men and have intercourse, and then they give birth to the.
Well, let me cut you off because I really enjoy the way that you can articulate these complex concepts that have been garbled over history, and you've really mindfully gone away about ways of bringing these ideas to light in historical and in literature.
Yeah,
and I appreciate that. So me being a little younger, going through Facebook, I see, what's trending, and it's always the ancient aliens, the Anunnaki, and then the Nephilim, right? The Nephilim from the Bible, and it becomes the giants, and there's all sorts of convoluted stories in there. But that's why I'm always thankful of having the Urantia book, that it kind of sets those straight. So have you come to a way that maybe, you explain it? I know you just came back from that contact in the desert. I'm sure you were inundated with new ways of explaining these concepts.
Yeah, we were flooded with...
no pun intended.
Yeah, really, no fun. It's not the Great Flood, but it's a flood. And we weren't drowned, but we survived. But anyway, we had to kind of sit through that. What I did, I've been there many times, right? So started some years ago. And I was an inaugural speaker with the first conference speaking about the Urantia picture of this. So I did that for 2 years, and then they left. They fired me after that because Urantia's not well known enough, number one. Number two, I was like a lot of Urantia people. I didn't know about the other stuff.
Oh.
The biblical stuff, the Sumerian stuff. I knew the Plato stuff because of Sarmast. I knew that. So I used that, but I didn't use the other stuff. So you have to really use all the sources to be credible. So in a way, I wasn't ready, for that. So So I've been watching what they're doing, and of course we have the Ancient Aliens show on the History Channel, and most of us have watched a lot of it or some of it, right? I mean, you can't miss it late at night.
Especially if you're at a hotel.
It's like you're stuck in a hotel somewhere, and just like, what else is, to keep me, entertained, and then you see some bizarre thing on the History Channel, so you stop there, and so they got the
throw
guy
the remote,
guy with the funny hair, and David Wilcock with crazy theories, and, and then you get the megalith guys and talk about the megalithic cities, and which is pretty cool stuff. How do you explain these big stones that they find all over the place, so you can come up with some cockamamie theory, and the academics don't touch it hardly.
Right.
So that's how you get this what I call a pop culture version of origins.
Oh, okay.
That's what it is, right? So because you get the Bible, and that's just really not minor, but it's very brief and cryptic, and so eventually somebody wants to fill it in with something more sensational.
Sure.
And the other big guy is Erich Von Dniken.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And, he sold millions, probably 20 million copies of his many books. Broke the story in the 60s that really these are chariots of the gods, right? So he's just one of these people that takes his stuff literally in the Bible and Sumerian literature and other things, that beings came down. So for him, it had to be astronauts.
Sure.
Which was way out when he said that was just considered, kind of pulp fiction. I remember, I read that stuff when I was a kid. It was fun to read. But
when did he come out?
First book was like 1964, maybe.
64. Okay.
Yeah, and he was an amateur, but he was a really cool guy because he deeply committed, but he was a guy that ran hotels. That was his main gig, right?
Get out of here, really.
So he was a hotelier, pretty big hotels and stuff. And so he had this side thing, and he had read the Bible. He was a committed Christian, actually. So he wanted to get into the Christian story. And so he kind of just hit upon this, and he was kind of right that you had to have some way to explain, Adam and Eve, because the Bible doesn't tell you why and wherefore about Adam and Eve, really.
No, nothing.
They're just like, boom, they're plopped down in this thing, Garden of Eden.
From a rib and dirt.
Giants and Nephilim, and what are they? And there's no definition of it. And so, he took it on to his credit, and he came up with a entertaining theory. And, basically it's not terrible stuff because it could have been astronauts. Certainly the ETs have been here. So, why didn't they? Maybe they did some of this, or, maybe they did all of it, but we have other sources. Yeah. We got Plato. Of course, we got the Urantia book, which is, in my humble opinion, by far the most rational, clearly laid out, origin story by far. Yeah. But again, it's not the only story. Number one. Number two, you have to have corroboration.
Right.
You have to have evidence. And the Urantia book doesn't give you the evidence. It gives you a story. It's a pretty good story. Yeah. And, the Urantia book is like literary, in a way. You could say it's literary source because it's, you want a story to hang together. Plato hangs together. Urantia book hangs together.
Right.
Bible is kind of fragmented, so it doesn't exactly hang together. Well, the reason Bible's important is a huge narrative about the Bible. There's a, fantastic set of commentaries on Genesis that do hang together. That's
Sumerian ones.
Not so much. No, Christian. The Christian doctrines about Adam and Eve. It's all worked out.
The books of Moses.
About the Hebrew stuff, but the Christian commentary on Genesis is the basis of our culture. It's our origin story. It is not nothing. It's important. And it's how we get the doctrine of sin, for example. Adam and Eve were put here and they sinned. That's why you and I are sinners. That's why we had to have Christ. So that's the whole pretext of Christianity, is their reading of Genesis. So there's a lot at stake here because, we're surrounded by fundamentalist Christians who think that we're sinners because of Adam and Eve. because they fell and they chose, God condemned them and they were the first humans. And so because of that, we are sinners because we're descended from Adam and Eve.
Right.
So this thing goes so far that we now have creationist Christians. And one of the key reasons they are creationists is if Adam and Eve were not sinners, then we wouldn't need Christ. So if you take Adam and Eve away, then you're taking Christ away.
Oh, wow.
So if you have evolution, right, that we evolved from apes, then that means we're not sinners, and therefore we don't need Christ to redeem us.
Okay.
So
Sure.
it kind of makes you dizzy. Just
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But that's really, they're right, because that's the doctrine.
Yeah.
That is it. But it's a Protestant version. It's not really the Catholic version.
Okay.
But it's close to the Catholic version.
So would you say that then maybe you've taken kind of a personal interest in this Adam and Eve story, and so much so that you've been led to go and find the Garden of Eden?
I took a personal interest in the Christian narrative. I grew up with it, and I always thought it was bizarre, and I always thought this thing of the sin was terrible, accusation, to hurl at somebody when they're like 3 years old or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, we all grew up with something version of that, most of us, right? And even if you're Jewish, but if you're Jewish, you get like a little tiny bit, but Christians get a lot of it, right? Jews don't really have this doctrine of sin like we do, right? And they came out later in the 3rd, 4th century, and they said, look, this is the deal, believe this and be saved. So they worked that out. So the Jews said, we don't really think that way, right? We have a different thing. So it's really a Christian. So it's more, personal to me, having been brought up with this and feeling like, guilty all the time,
Right.
And shame about, sexuality or whatever. So it's personal, it's deep. It's a thing of the heart, like, are you really condemned when you're born, because if you weren't baptized the way I was told, you're of the devil.
Right.
You have to be cleansed. And that's Adam and Eve that started that whole deal.
That we inherited.
Inherited, biological or somehow. There's an inheritance of sin. So you got to get that this is tied up with your being, your life. It's not just archaeology.
Society's conversation about, it's our narrative.
It is our primal narrative of origin. Somehow God, placed plants, animals, fish, sky, put in the sky, right? God put it in the sky, God put it in the earth, then he put plants, then he put animals, then he put man, and he said it was good. He said it was good. And he said, and when I put man, I wanted to have a partner for man, so that's a woman, right? And then God looked at them and said, this is very good. And then a few lines later it says, not a few lines later. In that passage, he says, or the narrative by Moses says, we decided that we wanted to make man in our image and likeness. And so we made man to be in our image.
Right.
That's a kind of a nice, that part I like.
That's in the Urantia book too.
And of course, the Urantia book clarifies in great depth. And so likeness and image of God is like pretty good image, it's image of God. But what answer your long-winded answer to your question, the new narrative is we're made in the image of dark aliens.
Made in the image of sinners, hybrid slave sinners.
Yeah. I don't know about the sinner thing, but they were just hominids, right? That according to ancient astronaut theory, they were hominids or sort of primitive Homo sapiens, and they came from this other place. They found us primitive and unable, no skills, so they spliced in their genes, and then we were upgraded enough to work for them as slaves.
Right.
So that's their origin story is we started out as slaves.
According to certain conspiracy history people, I mean. Yeah. I mean, not only does the Urantia book debunk that theory, but so does the real work, like some of the work that you're doing, like really using the actual professional interpretations of words and things like that isn't so ancient aliens and more fits into maybe an administrative system that is more logical as far as developmental stages for planetary evolution, things like that,
Glad you put it that way, because this is primeval and how you start tells you how you're going to finish. So if you start out as slaves, then you're probably going to finish as slaves. Or if you start out as sinners, you're going to finish as sinners unless you buy our gospel, right? Unless you come to our church.
Yeah.
So it is lots at stake. But if we start out as made in the image of God, just stop there. Full stop.
It is. But then there's always this separation of camps or tribes. It's like this tribe, they're saved. This tribe, not saved. It's like being made in the image of God needs to be something that's so universal for all of us. And it's like a shared experience versus a shared creed of some sort.
I mean, really, if you just took that one passage, you could say that's for all humankind. And in later, all the Hebrews, not all, but the prophets, the Hebrew prophets said, that was one of the main things. They said, when they said that in the Bible, they meant all those other races, not just the Hebrews.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but also even the early Abraham sort of discourse. And, right after this, then they introduce Abraham and Cain and Abel and stuff. And the voice is telling Abraham, you are the beginning of something for all people, not just for your children, but it's all the races. It actually states that, but then other times it doesn't. It contradicts itself.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting in the Urantia book, it talks about that, as you mentioned earlier, while they were in that Babylonian captivity, there was such a sense of national and racial depression that they were trying to formulate kind of these stories to uplift that racial national pride as well. And in doing so, maybe went a little too far towards the self-centeredness of chosen people and not really reflective of the original teachings of some sort.
The thing with the Hebrews is they had both voices all the way from the beginning. They had this kind of God saying you're good, and then they had almost like another God saying you're bad,
right?
And you're screwing up, and I'm mad, right?
Yeah.
So there's like these two different lines going, but when you get to Isaiah, then it's purified. It's like you're good. I'm your God. I love you. I'm sending my son. Yeah. So then it's pretty purified. And then that comes into Christianity. But then later, as I said, they mess up Christianity, and some of the church fathers, not all of them, saying, no, we're actually sinners. So that voice in Genesis that said you're bad, sort of, we're going to bring that back in. We're going to bring it back.
Why is that brought back in?
Observation, really, because St. Augustine or St. Augustine, his observation of the human race was that it had to be original sin. Because look around, so he had his reasons, and he was pretty smart, so I don't.
Interesting.
So,
well, there was something that you said earlier that caught my mind, and I want to mention it before I forget, is that if you're born a slave, you end up a slave. And then I can't help but think about the story of Moses in the Urantia book, how he saved these enslaved people, essentially. But yet the blowback result of that was Yahweh being a vengeful God. And then since Yahweh saved them, they were highly respected by Yahweh. And then Yahweh would get vengeance on those who enslaved Yahweh's children, so to speak. So it's kind of like if you're born of enslavement, there's always retribution that's on your mind as well, too.
There's a lot of interesting vectors in this because the Hebrews were slaves, as you state. Of course, they were slaves. And so Exodus is coming out of slavery.
Right.
And so Yahweh says, I am the God that brought you out of slavery. And I'm telling you, you have to be good to your neighbors.
Right.
You have to take care of the widows and the poor because you too were poor. You were like widows. So I took care of you. Now you take care of the poor, including other races.
Yeah.
But then other times Yahweh doesn't say that. Other times Yahweh says, go kill those guys, right? Because they're in your way, right? And so it's a big mess, really. It's convoluted. And so some Christians went to the sort of the dark side stuff and brought that out, that Yahweh was an angry God and thought we were sinful. But other Christians, like the Quakers, went to the other voice, which was made in the image of God. We're in his likeness. He loves us unconditionally, and we're good, and we don't have to believe in this atonement doctrine, right? Which is that
how freeing.
Jesus died to free us from sin, right? His blood was needed, So there are two schools at least in Christianity from day one.
I know that you're studying a lot of this stuff right now, and that's awesome. You're studying divinity school essentially, right? In New York, right? What school are you at now?
I'm at Union Theological Seminary.
Awesome.
So that's why I'm kind of up on this Bible stuff.
So what so far in your research over there, has anything popped up that's kind of coincided with your Urantia studies that maybe you didn't put together before, maybe through early Christian history or something like that?
Okay, I'll give you some background because we were talking about the contact in the desert. So I put on a conference just before it to talk about new theories from the Urantia book, which I call the double default and the triple blessing.
The triple blessing.
Double default, triple blessing. So the first two visitations, first two epical revelations failed, as we know from the Urantia book. So the Urantia, narrative is very tragic. But then we had three big blessings to compensate. Then we had the visitation by Macaventa Melchizedek. Then we had, of course, what am I missing? Then we had, after Adam and Eve, we had the Jesus. Then we had Jesus, and then we had the Urantia. The Urantia book is the fifth or the third bless. So the three blessings are Macaventa, Jesus, and the Urantia book. But the first two were failures.
Right.
The mission failed. So we need a lot of makeup, and we got a lot of makeup. We got Macaventa Melchizedek, who initiated the key world religions. Then we got Jesus, who was, the Creator's son. And then we got the Urantia book, a massive revelation. So that's what we did at this conference. We went through all five. It was a lot to chew, a lot to bite off.
Wow!
And we kind of went through over 3 days, and people gave talks, and our heads were spinning.
I can imagine.
So then we went across the street to this other big hotel where they had everybody giving the pop culture version of this. And it was shocking. It was shocking contrast.
Okay.
Because they're saying astronauts came down and spliced their genes and made us slaves, and
there's almost a common narrative of that pop history that you're talking about. It's like everyone has kind of agreed to the same kind of conspiracy dialogue, and so then now they just add their little bits to it, and they kind of stand out because of that.
Exactly right. And it really started from Von Dniken, but now we should say a few words about Zecharia Sitchin.
Okay.
Which, you and I like to laugh about this guy because, Sitchin picked up on this theme in the 70s. And he was a nobody, and he said, I can read the tablets, Sumerian tablets.
Right.
Wrote this stuff, and it became big bestsellers.
Right.
And sold 10 million copies of all of his books. That's a major, major bestseller. Bestseller is defined as 50,000. So he had 10 million. So this is a huge, epic thing. Urantia book sold, so far 1 million, and nobody ever talks about it anywhere. But Sitchin's theories became the current thing that is the origin story for pop culture.
Yeah.
Not for the academics, of course. And so it grew and grew and grew until you had this tremendous, like, Woodstock called Contact in the Desert. So the first Contact in the Desert was just so big, and I was amazed at how popular this stuff is. But I was exceptional because I'm mainly Urantia, so I knew this stuff was false.
Right.
Or
right.
I believe it's false.
Right.
But to their credit, they let me speak there. So I have a counter narrative from the Urantia book.
Awesome.
But the main narrative, it's very typically American, because the American mentality is there's got to be technology, a machine, it's mechanistic, right? So they could never imagine angels doing stuff, but it'd be more like ships coming down, right? There would be ships. And then they slowly land on the surface, right? And then the ETs come out and they survey, I will make you a slave. You will mine gold for me. It's like, what? And people believe it because, it's a very American thing to believe in a way. That's everybody's on a hustle.
Yeah.
And even the ETs are on a hustle.
Yeah.
So they came down here and hustled us to be their slaves. It fits the American mentality. Yeah. But the Urantia book doesn't really fit American mentality. Not really.
No.
That's why, it's people. So we're this very minority discourse, narrative. And that's the issue. So bringing it up to the present, we're presenting the data obtained based on the Atlantis theory, which matches some of the Urantia theory.
Right.
So that's complicated.
Yeah.
So maybe we should get into that if you want to get into
Yeah, let's get into what angle are you taking? Like, what's your opener?
Yeah. Well, the elevator speech goes like this, that the Plato's story of Atlantis is pretty decent, and as long as you don't believe it's in the Atlantic.
Right.
So that means you have to retranslate a couple of sentences, actually, where it seems to say, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. So that would be way out in the Atlantic. But actually, it's the Pillars of Hercules could have been the gateway to the Black Sea, where Istanbul is today. I forget what they call that. Mm-hmm. That could be it. And so that was what Samaras, this Robert, getting back to him, that's what he said, and other people have said, that it had to be there. Why? Because all these events don't happen in the Atlantic. I mean, the whole history of mankind, nothing happens in the Atlantic.
Right.
Nothing at all. It's either Africa, it's the Middle East, it's Greece, it's Egypt, India. It's not in the Atlantic. I mean, how could it be?
Yeah.
It's possible.
It's pretty isolated out there.
It's stupid. It's just cockamamie.
Well, it goes along with that kind of alien isolation idea that these people, these Atlanteans, were so isolated, and it's just this higher evolved race that the rest of the world wasn't exposed to, until some cataclysmic event that dispersed them everywhere and whatnot.
Right. So we got to get to that because, that's again, pop culture. So they're in the Atlantic and they're very advanced, and then they have this high tech, technology, and then pretty soon they become proud, and then they pride comes for a fall, so they destroy themselves, and then there was a flood, right? Mm-hmm. And all that happened, and there was no way to track it because they always said it was in the Atlantic. And there's no artifacts in the Atlantic, and it doesn't tie in with anything else. Mm-hmm. So that's why it doesn't make sense. So, there are a few clues about the Atlantic. They were wrong. So the whole myth grows up in the Atlantic, but it just doesn't stand a basic reasonable thesis, for origin of humankind. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's without the Urantia book. That's without any, it's based on the Bible, it's based on Sumerian tablets, it's based on Egyptian myth, it's a Greek myth, all of that. None of that could have happened out there.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense. So the contact in the desert. So these people they're trying to find, how do we explain this to the American mentality in the 70s and 80s and 90s? What can I sell?
Okay.
What can I sell? Okay. So Sitchin concocts a story. So as you know, Derek, this guy has now been exposed.
Yeah. But not everybody knows that.
Most people don't know it, but it's getting out there, because I noticed that this year's Contact in the Desert definitely de-emphasized the Sitchin
model.
Yeah. And the first one 5 years ago was very strong.
Interesting.
And it's less now. And I think that the word is coming, because there's debunking stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to, there's a film called, it's called Ancient Astronauts Debunked. Definitely a must see.
Yeah.
Because it goes through all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Sitchin's just one of them. And they debunk many other things. And it's a very nicely done film, but nobody watches it because it's not sensational.
There's another site called SitchinIsWrong.com.
SitchinIsWrong.com.
Yeah, but that guy, I forget his name, Michael Heizer. Yeah, he's an interesting one. He had a video on YouTube where he was kind of debunking the Urantia book, but he didn't really read it. He just kind of went by Wikipedia reviews and stuff like that.
Well, he was stuck in a booth for 3 days, next to a booth I was in for 3 days.
Wow.
With the Urantia book.
Wow. Okay. So maybe he opened it. Yeah. Was this before or after his video that came out?
I don't remember.
Was this recently?
It was 5-6 years ago. But I think he knew about it previously.
You must have sparked something in him, and then he went on a research.
Hammered him with this stuff because there were 3 days. It was boring, and so. But he did a poor job in his review of the Urantia book. So it makes me wonder about his credibility. But I think we can say the guy can read, these tablets. I mean, that's his thing, right? That's his gig. So but it's not just him. There's all this other, just anybody can look this up now, because back in the 70s, you couldn't look it up. Because they didn't do the work until the 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
And all that stuff got translated. Then it's put into these lexicons, and you can just go in there and type in gold. And there's no references to gold. It's the entire, all the tablets have been translated. So keywords are nothing on gold. Planet X, nothing on that.
Well, you're at the University of Chicago, and that's where that lexicon is coming out of.
Yeah, coming out of
the Oriental Institute.
Oriental Institute, and many others around the world. So all he had to do, Heizer, was say, "Hey, look, here's a database. Do it yourself. Go in there, put in Anunnaki, put in these
search Nibiru,
search Nephilim, and you'll see it's just made up.
Right.
It's truly made. It's not that he was wrong; it was concocted, and it strikes me as being."
Sorry to cut you off, but like burning in my head. It's like the same. We're coming back to this same notion of like refabricating stories, right? Of Sumerian story, refabricating Sumerian stories with the Bible, the ancient astronaut theories, whatever your prophet is from those stories, right?
Refabricating? Is that the word you meant?
Yeah. What did I say?
Refabricating, I think you said. But it's fabrication, then you refabricate.
And refabricating,
keep retreading.
Story after story after story from the Sumerian source.
Yeah. So Sitchin started an industry. So all these other guys wrote books based on that because he was big. So what do? You want to do something commercial, or do you want to do something esoteric that doesn't sell? So if you want to do something esoteric that doesn't sell, Urantia is your choice. If you want to sell to the Christians, do a biblical interpretation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, or if you want to sell to the atheist consumers, just do a Hollywood presentation of an alien invasion of some sort.
Have like Independence Day or something.
Exactly.
Sell that, right? But if you want to sell to the New Age, then you have astronauts come down, they have beams coming out of their eyes or something, and interbreeding DNA, and then they're infusing DNA with light, or although that's a good thing to infuse it with light, but and so you have a New Age theory that mainly are just pop culture theories.
Sure.
And that sells. So if you want to sell, you can do that.
Well, now where's this tied up in the fact that some people are still looking for this alien leadership? Or, not everyone understands the life and mission and teachings of Jesus. Right. Not many people see him as the Messiah or whatever. And there is something that's embedded in our human DNA to have kind of celestial guidance. So is that still tied in that, even Jesus's apostles had trouble with accepting him as not this king of might, and it seems like culturally we're still kind of struggling with that.
I think so, because you want to have this, if it's not the King Messiah who will tell you what to do, it's an alien that will tell you what to do. Or it's a galactic council will tell you what to do. And so you're just looking for an authority.
Right.
Because you want to think for yourself. So the Urantia stuff you got a big disadvantage because it's telling you to think for yourself.
Right.
And then it gives you this revelation that doesn't match the New Age or the Old Age either too much. But it's mainly, referential to the Bible.
It is.
Yeah. It's taking everything in the Bible and expanding and everything. And it's some reference to the Sumerians, but.
So when you're at, let's say, contacts in the desert, how often are you referencing the Bible? And do you find, there's backlash if you're referencing it too much?
No, I think the Bible is well respected there as a primitive source, for sure, but it's just only about this much.
Wow.
Ranch book gives you 50 pages and Bibles like that. And it's weird. And then it's not even one, it's Adam and Eve, right? Then they give you a second Adam and Eve story. They have two Adam and Eve stories. They contradict each other. One, she's made from the rib, right? And the other, they're placed together. They're created at the same time. So it's even the Bible's convoluted. You got two different stories. Origin stories.
What do you tell people when there's maybe people my age and younger, and they're just convinced that there was all sorts of advanced technology back in Adam and Eve's day? And even though when reading the Urantia book, we learn about their lineage and the Andites and a lot of their architecture and the pyramids coming up from that. How do you help or ease their mind or
about the technology
yeah,
aspect.
yeah.
We fill in a little bit for those who are new that the Urantia revelation states that Adam and Eve gave birth to a race called the violet race. They have more advanced genetics and then intermarried, way pre-Sumerian. So they had more intelligence for sure. And so they could be better with tool making. So that group, there were several subgroups, right, that come out of that, the Nodites, the Andites. So they were more advanced, certainly with weapons, had better weapons. And they probably had, building material, or tools, and so could build megalithic cities, right? So you got to explain that. How do you explain the pyramids? My God. Mm-hmm. So was that what the Urantia book is? Urantia book doesn't tell you about the pyramids.
Well, it talks about Imhotep and Imhotep being an Andite architect who built the first pyramid in 5000 BC.
Oh, it says that? I missed that.
Yeah,
oh my God. But it doesn't tell you how.
Andites along the Nile.
That built the pyramid.
Well, yeah, it was Imhotep in particular.
Oh, man.
He was an Andite genius.
That's important for me to say.
5000 BC, dating that. So they said that was the first stone structure, that many stone structures were built around the world, but that was the first time in Egypt.
In Egypt. So, because now we've got the Göbekli Tepe discovery was way before that, way before Stonehenge, and you can't dispute that.
Right.
And that's like 12,000 BC.
Well, you want to get conspiratorial. I know that we're friends with Timothy Wiley, who left this planet. But he had some pretty interesting work regarding that. Really
great stuff. And a lot is in the last book, the 6th book, his series called the Rebel Angel series, which is quite controversial because it was channeled, but it was reliably written down because it's coherent for 1,000 pages of material. It's very coherent, right? Wow. It's a great narrative. And so he states that, for those new to the Urantia book, that there was this diabolical being named Caligastia that the Christians call the devil, who was, residing on the planet, and he ordered the construction of Göbekli Tepe.
For what purpose?
As a headquarters.
Like an Earth station?
Yeah, one of them. So the Wiley states, the channel states that was a anchor location for his work on Earth after the end of the Ice Age.
Interesting.
So once the recession of the ice, then he said, we're going to get a new start here. And so we're going to start here in Turkey with this major installation, but we're putting it on the locations of the ley lines where they intersect, right? Those are electromagnetic lines that are kind of proven to exist, and where they intersect with telluric lines, I think they call it. So the planetary grid. So what this says is, and it's speculative, of course, is that Caligastia put megalithic sites on those spots, which are power spots, vortexes, that they could extract the energy from the earth and use it for stuff. So one site was there, and then somewhat later the pyramids, but also China, Latin America, Central America are these ley line sites. And if you draw circles around the earth, you see that these megalithic sort of temples are on the ley lines. And they really are. Yeah. And so some of the more New Age type writers have noticed that. And it is the case. And, I haven't studied this enough, but it looks that way to me. So
it does look that way. I mean, from my studying, I see it as Andite architecture, and they fit. Imhotep is credited with building that step pyramid of for Dozier. And it looks like the Mayan temples. It looks like the ziggurat, right? It looks like the temples in China and India. It's like an architectural style.
Yep.
I've been to Peru in Machu Picchu. So you can see the difference between the Andite architecture of huge megalithic build or whatever, monoliths, and then the later Inca people coming in and kind of building in afterwards. And you wonder, why is it that there was some sort of cataclysm because why did they have to come in and build in on top of it, whatnot? So you wonder who was building on top of what was already there, and then what stories come from that. Because I know Göbekli Tepe was buried on purpose, was it not? And I'm sure there's tons of speculation as to why.
They're getting pretty good science now out of there, and but I think that there's agreement that it was buried. So why would that be?
Right.
And so this is a huge area of research for the next 100 years. Really, is these megalithic sites, which mainly the pop culture rendition is getting pretty good. It's getting pretty good. But if you added the Urantia on top of that about these megalithic sites, then you can explain more.
Yeah.
So we have a better explanation of Göbekli Tepe, maybe using Wiley, but not just Wiley. You can infer without Wiley. Right. That this was not benign. It's not, it's because it looks dark. The symbolism is not that uplifting or anything like that.
A little sinister.
Yeah, it looks sinister to anybody really looking at it. And according to Wiley's source, the animals that you see on those megaliths there, those are what they call sigils, which are symbols of tribes that Caligastia's midwayers brought to the site and said, "This is your totem. This is your totem. This is your worship site." And they're channeling to the high priest, right? This is your totem. So put your totem up here. And they got the tribes to work together to build, because there's a huge thing to build. No one tribe could have built that.
No.
There's no way.
There's like 21 different temples.
It's different temples, different complexes. And you see these sigils, and there's a bunch of them. So there's a lot of tribes that had to be made to give up what they were doing, which was, subsistence farming.
Right.
And go and do this? Like, why?
Could be masons all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Just cut stone.
Have stones that are 5,000, tons or whatever it is, and drag it there to etch out these things and put, it doesn't look like a real benign.
Well, so like all this stuff it's sexy, and it's because it's more Hollywood-like. It's like out of the movies and stuff. Going back to your experience at Contact in the Desert, let me get back a little bit of like your elevator speech, but then where did you find a lot of people interested? Like, where were you starting to hook people?
I was trying to explain, and when I spoke there, that Adam and Eve's story is backed up by our first expedition so we haven't really talked about that. So because Sarmas book that I mentioned, then an expedition was done, and you're going to talk to Fred Harris after me about this. And Fred was integral to that project, was to raise money to go to where the Urantia book said this Garden of Eden was located. But Sarmast was clever, and he didn't use the Urantia book at all. He used Plato, but Plato kind of fits with the Urantia book.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to say, is that that's why we call it Eden-Atlantis project, because it does match Plato.
So people want to hear more after that.
So after I said, well, this matches Plato, and Plato has a lot of prestige with these guys, but it's Urantia. You never heard of that. So I introduced Urantia, and I said, this is how this thing happened. And then there's other evidence of what happened afterwards. The Andites, the pyramids, you name it. Yeah. Why did this stuff happen there? Because the primeval city was Eden.
Right.
And even the Sumerians say there was a primeval city. And the Greeks say there was a primeval city. They call it Atlantis. So they got it from the Egyptians. That's what they said, right? So you got a pretty good correlation. You don't have to rely on the Urantia book that much. But Urantia book gives you the clue, the biggest clue, which is it was on this isthmus linking Cyprus to Syria. That's kind of a big clue.
Yeah.
So it's either there or not. And, and it's not that hard to go out there, and indeed it was not hard, because with a small investment, they found something that's obviously not man-made, and that was 2004.
Okay.
So what I'll give you slides you can put on the show that it shows that there was a wall, what appears to be a wall that is uniform width and height, going over 2 miles.
Oh wow!
Right. So then it takes a right angle, a 90-degree right angle. I mean, come on. And they got an expert, underwater oil expert.
Oh,
president of a major company. to say this is kind of unprecedented. This is a thing that goes like 3,500 meters straight line, and then it takes a right turn. I mean, that
obviously man-made.
Yeah, these are guys that do this for a living. They look for oil, so they know what's on the ocean floor. And the guy had never seen anything like that. And then next door, not next door, but right next to it is this mound. And Plato said there was a mound. The Urantia book says there was a mound on which they put a temple.
The Temple Mound, yeah.
The Temple Mound. So, the matches Plato too. So there's this little straight line that could have been a wall. Then there's this mound where there's a temple. And our data showed that there was circular formations on the top of the mound, several of them. That did not come out until more recently with better interpretation of the data by Captain Robert Bates.
He's awesome.
So Bates is important. We should finish on talking about his work.
Yeah, let's talk about Captain Bob.
So Bob was the expedition leader in 2004, based on the book, privately funded, that found this wall, found this stuff on the mound, and found what looked like a quarry.
Ooh.
Remnants of a quarry. And then the film of that was used, and Fred was very critical for helping to negotiate with the History Channel to go back.
Oh, wow.
So the History Channel went back.
Right.
Second time.
Right.
And the equipment that they used mainly failed. And so you can watch that video at our website.
I saw it. It was pretty depressing, actually.
It's a well-made video, and what I like about the video is it tells the story I'm telling pretty well.
It does.
And then at the end, it's terrible and tragic.
Yeah.
But so you watch it for that. The narration is excellent, and they compare it to other theories, and it just trounces the other theories, and it's a great thing to watch. So it's at Eden-Atlantis You can see the film. We just posted that film.
Eden-Atlantis
yeah.
Now back to Bob. He's really spearheaded a lot of this.
He did the
research.
first one, but the History Channel didn't bring him back for the second one, and they should have. They brought their own people, and they put Sarmast in the star role, and Sarmast is a visionary, he's not technical.
Right.
So Sarmast couldn't manage these technical guys that well, but the responsibilities to History Channel, and their stuff didn't work. So it doesn't prove or disprove. But Bates got the data that came out of that, which was about very small amount of data because mainly failed, but they got some data, and it definitely improves the picture. But then he later realized that Sarmast's interpretation is not quite right. So the punchline is that the Urantia book says that this wall, the Urantia book doesn't say wall, but what he said was a wall is the sewage system.
Oh, for the garden?
Yeah, as mundane as that sounds. But they tell us there's this very long, thing that's a big ditch that they dug carefully and brick lined. So it's a lot of bricks, and it goes all the way out to the ocean, a really long way. And that is what that is, but it was thrust upward and looks like a wall. But it's actually a ditch that was thrust upward when it sunk, right? So it was sinking, but also there's forces, vectors moving upward. So it pushed through that ditch, and the ditch is like sort of like this.
So the ditch was pretty deep then.
So it's a big ditch. Yeah, it tells you it's a pretty big. I forget the depth of it, but I think the width is like 9 meters or something. So it's pretty big. Yeah. And so they had 20,000 people, and a lot of people live in there, so they had to have a big sewage system. Sure. So that's what we're saying, and so it's pretty easy to disprove. Especially you could do some coring down there, and it's not hard to do coring at a mile. So we want to go back out there and do more sonar work. Yeah. And maybe coring work, and maybe put a remote operated, robot down there.
Yeah, it seems like technology has advanced a little bit since the last time you guys went out there.
Quite a bit, because it's driven by oil exploration. So it's really much better, and very digital, very sensitive, and so looking for formations for oil. So this is easy for us. So Bates is kind of emerged after many years of thinking and ruminating, and he's retired now. So he's got all the time. So Nice. He's written a new book called the Eden-Atlantis Project, and that book comes out next month. That would be in September or October. Okay. That explains everything I've said in pretty good detail with all the images.
Oh, awesome.
Of everything. So we get the films, we get the book, we get the images. Most of that's at the website, but most of the book is also the website. So you can get the whole story, and we're looking for folks to help us get this on Netflix or HBO or
that'd be awesome.
So we're looking for right now basic money to get started, seed money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Eden-Atlantis
Yeah.
All right, you heard it. Well, awesome. Thanks, Byron.
Okay.
It's been awesome having you here. Thanks, you guys, for joining us. Byron, please come back anytime. We'd love to have you back.
All right. Thanks, Derek. Thanks
Awesome.
very much.
Thanks again.